Seeing is believing, seeing is the truth. Yet cognitive scientists seem to have uncovered these views as incorrect. Evolution led us to perceive what is best for survival, and it turns out that this has little to do with what we call reality. Is reality then a creative construct that helps us to live but doesn't reflect the world? Are physical objects a useful hallucination, or is the very idea of reality perhaps a mistake? And neuroscientists have just got it wrong. So fortunately we have very illustrious and very real discussants to help us in this debate. We have Donald Hoffman, who is an American cognitive psychologist at the University of California, Irvine. And his forthcoming book is The Case Against Reality, so that might give you a sense of where he might lie in this debate. Maria Baghramian is the head of University College Dublin's philosophy department. She is an expert on metaphysical relativism and the author indeed of Relativism. And Hilary Lawson is a postmodern philosopher who calls for a post-Derridian return to metaphysics. He's the author of Closure, A Story of Everything, and he's also the director of the Institute of Art and Ideas. And the question I'll pose is reality just a creative construct that helps us to live but doesn't reflect the world? And I'll start with Donald Hoffman. Thank you.
Thank you. Most of my colleagues will address this from the point of view of evolution by natural selection. And the question would be, does evolution favor organisms that see reality as it is? And most of my colleagues think yes, that those creatures that see more truly have a competitive advantage over those who see less truly and are thus more likely to pass on their genes, which code for true perceptions. I've been looking at that problem using the mathematics of evolutionary game theory, which is the mathematical model of evolution by natural selection. And the answer turns out to be no. The probability that an organism that sees reality as it is can outcompete an organism of equal complexity that sees none of reality and is just tuned to fitness, the probability is zero. In other words, evolution will drive organisms that see the truth to extinction if they compete against organisms that are just tuned to fitness. So one of our best scientific theories, evolution by natural selection, gives a very, very strong answer. It says the probability is zero that we're shaped to see the truth. And the question is, what are we shaped to see? And I'll propose that this is just a user interface. Space and time is our desktop. Physical objects are just icons on the desktop. And just like the desktop on your computer is not there to show you the truth, the diodes and resistors and circuits inside your computer, it gives you eye candy to let you control reality, even though you don't know what reality is. That's what evolution did for us. It hides the truth and gives us little symbols that allow us to control reality, even though we have no idea what the reality is.
Thank you. Great. That was very helpful. Thank you. So I'll now turn with the same question to Hilary Lawson. Hilary, is reality just a creative construct that helps us to live but doesn't reflect the world?
Well, I'm a critic of realism, not in the sense that I think there's nothing out there. There's stuff out there. I just don't think that it comes already differentiated and already divided into objects and things and properties. And I think we close this, what I refer to as the openness of the world. We close the openness of the world with our language and our thoughts. So, of course, I agree with Donald that we don't accurately reflect reality. I'm not very comfortable with saying that it reflects it at all. In the sense, the very idea of reality seems to me to have got oneself into trouble. And indeed, the sort of position that I take up, which I describe as a non-realist position, has got a substantial pedigree. You may think it seems a bit wacky at first, but it's got a substantial pedigree in contemporary philosophy. So outside of analytic philosophy, I'd include in that Nietzsche, the later Wittgenstein, Heidegger, Derrida. They're all non-realists. And in some way, their response to that non-realism is to avoid talking about the overall description of what's going on in the world at all. They have different strategies, but in the end, that they're trying to avoid saying how it ultimately is because of a self-referential problem. If you're a non-realist, how do you actually manage to say this? Because the critic will say, well, that's just your truth. Surely you're just importing truth to that. So I've tried to face that problem, and the framework that I've proposed to you, that we think of the world as being open and we close it, is an attempt to try and overcome some of those issues of self-reference, and at the same time to provide us with a working model that will enable us to give a sense to an understanding of what's going on, but without saying this is ultimately how it is. And just, I don't know whether, just very quickly, I could give you an idea of what sort of thing I want to say. So I want to say there are different layers of closure in the human organism. We can think of the first layer as being the sensory layer, and the sensory layer takes all of the stuff out there and it responds in a sort of particular way. So a neuron in the eye fires or it doesn't fire. So it takes all of the stuff out there and it has one response, one sort of particular response. And that's not a description of what's out there, it's a causal response to what's out there. And we are able to respond to that, as it were, closure, in that case sensory closure, and to use it to intervene, but it's not a description of what is there. And I think we then have higher levels of closure which combine senses from the closures from one sense with the closures from another sense, and we do that by realizing the idea, thought. So we hold, say, the feel of this object with the look of it, and we hold those two completely different things with a new closure, which is the idea of, the table or whatever we want it to be. So I think this mechanism of closure enables us to intervene, but we don't know, we can't say anything about what's sort of ultimately there.
Thank you, Hilary. So Maria, I'll turn to you with the same question. Is reality just a creative construct which doesn't actually reflect the world?
So we have heard two very heady, sexy views about vision and our connection with the world. I'm here genuinely representing the common sense view, and the position I have is known variously as common sense realism, direct realism, even naive realism. I prefer naive realism. I think a new naivete in philosophy is a welcome thing at this time in our troubled world. My position basically is, well, what is a theory of visual perception for? Well, a theory of perception has to account for three things. One, our connection with the external world. Two, what goes on inside us, both in terms of our brain and neuronal activities, as well as our phenomenological experiences of what we perceive. And three, and the most important point for me as far as a theory of experience is concerned, is the distinction between illusory and veridical experiences, which is basically the distinction between when we are right and when we are wrong. You can talk about that in terms of truth or falsity if you like, but some people don't like that. But we do need to make a distinction between when we get things right and when we are wrong. And I think a theory of direct perception to the effect that when we look at the world, we see things that are there, and in those cases, our experiences are veridical, they are accurate, they are truthful, or we get things wrong because of illusion, because of hallucination, because of sheer error. And those cases, we are just wrong, and we can't have knowledge in those instances. Now, my direct realism has a twist to it. I'll come back to that later on.
Great, thank you very much. And actually, thank you. Actually, Maria, you've signalled our first area of discussion, which is to respond a little to the proposition that, Donald, you've been making, and then get the panel's view. So the idea really that you're advancing, if reality is a creative construct, then does that mean that physical objects are hallucinations? I mean, Maria's already distinguished between the ones that are, the hallucinations that are, and then things that aren't actually hallucinations. Are you arguing then that everything that we think is an object before us is actually a construction?
For more debates, talks and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at iaitv.